God of Fury is the fifth book in Rina Kent's Legacy of Gods dark romance series. It was published December 6th, 2023, and it is one of the most liked, most recommended male or romance books of the past few years. It has a 4.49 out of 5-star average on Goodreads with nearly 74,000 reviews. And from the everything of this video, you can probably tell that I didn't like it very much. And I had to reflect on that. I had to reckon with the fact that so many people like this book and I didn't. Could it be that I'm missing something? Could it be that everybody else is right and maybe I'm wrong? No. I'm right and everyone else is wrong, and I'm going to tell you why this book is bad. This book has a cavalcade of content warnings that I'm going to need to talk around while I'm doing this review. I would strongly encourage you to check out Storygraph for those specific content warnings if you haven't read this book before you watch this review. Otherwise, I am going to be thoroughly recapping the book in case you haven't read it or if you haven't read it in a while, and then I'm going to talk about things that I liked. I didn't hate everything in this book, but I'm going to spend a lot more time talking about things that I didn't like. If you particularly like this book, that's great. I'm not interested in having a argument about whether you did or didn't like it. That is completely subjective. I didn't like it. You did like it. I am going to be talking about why I didn't like it. If you would like to listen to that and perhaps have that add to your understanding of the world, I think that's great. If you are intending on arguing with me and telling me why I'm wrong for not liking it or why things that I bring up are incorrect, no, you're not, because I'm going to delete your comments. Please don't do that. All right, I have 13 pages of notes. This is going to take forever. Let's get started. I'll start with the characters before we get into the story, but before we even get there, I do want to note that Rina Kent describes this as a standalone book. In fact, she writes it all capital letters in the intro, that this is possible to read standalone. And I don't think that that's particularly true. It is true in like the barest possible sense. There is a lot of interpersonal relationships going on that are related to the other books in the Legacy of God series, and the two main male characters of this book are the sons, the second generation of characters from previous series of Kent's. So your mileage may vary on just how standalone you'll find this book. When I was putting everything together for this review, I was learning things about these characters and their interpersonal relationships from looking at a Rina Kent Wikia. So I don't know. I don't particularly buy that it's actually standalone. All that being said, let's run through the characters who we're going to be following for the next 500 or so pages. The two main male characters are Brandon King and Nikolai Sokolov. Brandon King is a type A, fussy, elite British son of privilege. His father is the COO of a big multinational company. Their family are billionaire. He is the heir of a billionaire family. And his mother is an elite artist in London. Nikolai Sokolov also comes from immense privilege, although he is in a mafia family. His parents are the best hitman in one of the most important Russian mob families in the United States. And he is married into that guy. Kyle Hunter has married into the Russian mafia. Nikolai Sokolov is like a quarter Russian, I think, or not even that potentially, but he is part of this family and he is an heir. He is going to eventually be one of the leaders of the Bratva, the Cosa Nostra of the Russian mafia in the United States. He is in the United Kingdom where he has a chance to meet Brandon King because there is an island on the southwest coast of the UK where all the elites send their kids, the muckety-muck elites of British high society and the Russian mob. They have two separate universities that are there, and they are rivals, and they even have a fight club where people from those two universities fight with each other. This is more fun saying it than it is to read, but like there is a lot of soap opera-ness in this book, and I can tell from reading about the plot of previous books and other books in the series that it is extremely it is like Russian mafia Gossip Girl, and I just desperately wish that there had been way more of that on the page and way less constantly repetitious interiority, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Nikolai Sokolov, the other main male character, is the the golden retriever sunshine in this grumpy sunshine couple, although he is also stated on page numerous times throughout the book, a raging psychopath. One of the things that Kent does throughout this entire book is not make it entirely clear whether Nikolai, who usually goes by Nico, has unalived anyone in his brief 19 years. He jokes about it constantly, and by the end of the book, oh, by the way, there will be spoilers throughout this entire video. By the end of the book, we do have a confirmed on-page kill, but he certainly beats up a lot of people. He beats some people to the point where they may not be able to live anymore. He seems to have been doing this since he was just a wee little child, but it's played for jokes throughout the entire book. Ha ha ha. Brandon and Nico are the two POV characters for every chapter except one where Brandon's father, Levi, gets a POV. I think that's meant to be like a fun cameo for people who've read the previous books. There are a slew of other side and minor and peripheral characters throughout this entire book. So many that I can't possibly name all of them. The most relevant ones are Brandon's identical twin brother, Landon. That's right. Brandon and Landon, identical twin brothers. Landon is also a raging psychopath who's probably unalived some people, and also by the end of the book gets an on-page kill. Nico's twin sisters, Maya and Mia, so that's two pairs of twins in this series. Clara, a brief female romance that we'll get into of Brandon's. Grace Bruckner, a baroness or some kind of lady in the House of Lords who is an elite art agent, and she gets mentioned briefly in the first 80 pages of the book and then does not come up again until around page 400, and then she is like the most important character in this entire book. Again, I am bleeding into, things that I didn't like about this. And then there are a ton of people who orbit around Brandon and Nico. Nico's crew are called the Heathens, and they are affiliated with King's University, that's the Russian mafia school, and Brandon's crew are the Elites, which is a college club at Royal Elite University, and that is the stuffy elite muckety-muck school. All right, with that being said, let's recap this story. I have a lot of notes. Act 1 begins in Brandon King's POV, which is the point of view of a very sad, very grumpy, very traumatized, very rich 23-year-old boy. I am not going to belabor this in the way that Kent does, but anytime we're in Brandon's POV, just remember that it is a constant, never-ending, I would call it prayer-like, repetitious inner voice that is self-deprecating and self-hating, and it just orbits around some mysterious past trauma that has left him fucked up and constantly thinking that he is engulfed in black ink. Put a pin in that. The other main male character, Nikolai or Nico, at the beginning of the story has lured Bran to the Heathens, his club's initiation ritual, by sending him a text lying that he has kidnapped Brandon's brother, Landon. This turns out to not be true, but Brandon shows up at this initiation where everyone is wearing masks, and it's like a contest in the forest to see like who can avoid the heathens hunting them down. It's a most dangerous game kind of situation. During the hunt, Nico is after Bran. He appears to have some kind of interest in Bran from before the story begins, and proceeds to sexually harass him in the woods, even though Brandon says that he's straight, not interested in this guy. After Brandon discovers that Landon isn't actually kidnapped by the heathens, he flees, but he has started to have some weird feelings about what's going on. The POV then shifts to right away, chapter 3, one of the weirdest chapters in any book that I've ever read. It is an extended introduction to Kolya, which is the Russian diminutive for Nikolai, and also, I believe, his uncle's name, and also the name that he gives to his member. He has called that object attached to him Kolya since he was 5, when it first sprang to life, and he's called it that ever since. And we are recounted to a fairly long and thorough history of Kolya and all of his indiscretions and adventures, the intimate escapades of this pansexual gourmand who is Nikolai Sokolov. Remember, he's 19. Anyway, after we get caught up on who Kolya is, the chapter could very well be called Kolya, Nico has been stalking Bran on his Insta and knows that Brandon goes for 5 a.m. runs, so he's gonna go on runs with Brandon as well. And he doesn't just like show up and is like, hey, can I go for a run with you? He like hides in the bushes and then waits for Bran to put in headphones, and then Brandon like goes off in his run, and then Nico like sneaks up behind him running and pulls his AirPods out and like whispers in his ear like, hey, I'm gonna get in that ass. It's gonna happen. And Brandon is like extremely frustrated by this. He does not know what to do with this. And this is like the beginning of, this is not in any of the content warnings for this book, but I would say that there is like very clearly dubious consent throughout this entire book. And it is only not dubious because we know about the repression later that has been going on with Brandon, but because it was okay, it's like, it was all fine. But it's not. Like, Nico, like, consistently harasses this guy until, he eventually gives in. So, while this is going on, Nico, in theory, is treating all of this like it's a game. It's just one more conquest for him. He's Nico Sokolov, he like, fucks anything that moves. He uses the word hole pretty frequently, recounting all of the very willing holes that he has serviced with Kolya. But a weird thing happens to him. Kolya is not rising to attention anymore. He is experiencing some kind of ED, and it is because, apparently, Kolya only has eyes for Brandon. This is kind of a bad situation because Nico has been established as sexually voracious, and now he is experiencing sexual frustration, and the object of it has said no, and one of these chapters ends with Nico literally uttering the words, "I can deal with no." I mean, like, if that's not extremely dubious consent, or really just like non-consent, not consent, I don't know what it is. But anyway, this is a dark romance, so it's all totally cool. After Bran firmly establishes that he is not interested, there is an unintentionally quite funny scene where Nico has like a series of Goldilocks conversations with the heathens, seeing if any of them like dudes. It's like, one is too hot, it's like, oh yeah, he's like super gay, and one is too cold, it's like, oh yeah, like extremely straight. But one of the heathens is like, well, I'm straight, and I don't even think I'm bisexual, but there was this one guy, and it's like, if that one guy was into it, I would be into it. And that whole chapter is just in there to like give us and Nico the thought of like, demisexuality is a thing. Maybe Brandon is demisexual. Maybe that no can become a yes. I don't like this. So Nico continues to chase Brandon quite literally on these runs, and at one point, when Brandon is visiting Nico, they very nearly kiss. You can tell like things are proceeding in this direction, but Brandon keeps pulling back. This is a push-pull kind of story. And in order to retreat from these potential feelings, which, by the way, Kent does... We spend so much interior time with these characters, and we get no grappling with, like, homosexual feelings from Bran about Nico until, like, much later in the book. He is just, like, constantly, like, prayer-like going, it's like, oh, I'm like a terrible person, I'm so up, the black ink is going to, like, engulf me, and I've got it, like, my art is bad. And that is, like, what we are treated to constantly with him. Not like, I'm freaking out because I think I'm into this guy, and, like, oh, I'm remembering all these things. Like, the way that this would actually go down, like, I'm remembering all these times from my past when I had similar feelings for a guy, or, like, that, you know, those videos that I watched when I was a kid. We get none of that. He is just, like, retreating from this, both literally and in his mind. He's, like, not touching this with a 10-foot pole. So he rekindles a relationship with a girl named Clara. Clara is a character created by Kent for everybody to hate. And of course, Nico being Nico, Bran having an even stronger reason to say no, to say, like, hey, this is, like, not a thing that you're pursuing, that just makes Nico want to try even harder. And we get a lot of misogyny from everyone. Everybody hates Clara, but especially from Nico, who has really terrible feelings towards her and wants to see stuff come out of her holes. So after getting drunk at a bar with the royal elite crew and some heathens hanging out with each other, I really don't understand the dynamic between these two cast of characters that well. Maybe I need to read the other books, but Brandon gets pretty drunk at a bar, and he leaves, and he's accosted by some street toughs. Oh no, what's he going to do? Here comes big, muscly, tattooed Nico Sokolov, who single-handedly beats the shit out of all these guys. It's, like, awful, covered in blood, and then he takes Bran into an alley, shoves him up against a wall, like, hand on his throat. Every single time these guys interact with each other, one or the other is grabbing the other one by the throat. There's a lot of, like, throat grabbing in this book. He shoves him into an alley, and despite Brandon being drunk and saying, no, I don't want to do anything right now, Nico forces a first sexual encounter on to Bran. Put a pin in that. I'm going to read you exactly what was going through Nico's mind as he initiated this encounter. Bran shakes against me, his fingers fisting in my shirt, and I'm not sure if he's pulling me closer or pushing me away. I don't give a f***. Tonight I'm taking what I should have stolen that night I met him at the initiation, whether his delusional brain likes it or not. Awesome. So Nico acquaints himself with Brandon's Kolya. I think he ends up calling Brandon's guy Bran Jr. much later in the book, and mutually, you know, uses hands to complete both of them. They have this whole encounter, and that does not cause Bran to break up with Clara. This alleyway liaison does not cause the end of that relationship, so he just continues on with his life. He plays a lacrosse game, even though he is an MFA student. I don't know why he is on the college lacrosse team, but he does a lacrosse game that Nico goes to and acts like a total bore. It's kind of charming. And then he again grabs Nico by the throat after the game in, like, somewhere off on the side and starts making out with him. He's just, like, forcing himself on this guy, and Brandon is just consistently like, I'm not into this, but it is very much a Pepe Le Pew, like, your mouth says no, 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 but your eyes say yes, yes, yes. None of this causes Brandon to leave Clara. So Nico decides, well, there's only one thing I can do to fix this situation. I need to use Kolya for evil purposes. So he decides he is going to pick up Clara, who is described on page as, like, a good time gal, which she is referred to, like, in really misogynistic and disparaging terms, but I will say that Kent is not, like, writ large disparaging people who enjoy sex and sexuality. Nico does as well. Like, he describes himself as a but he is going to use those powers to pick up Clara, and he texts Bran and tells him, if you do not come over to my penthouse and sleep with me, I am going to sleep with Clara and I am going to send you a video of us having sex with each other. Come here and sleep with me. And that is how Act 1 ends. Brandon comes over, breaks up with Clara, and then there is a 2-chapter fest between these two guys, and now they're in a relationship. All right, Act 2. Nico and Bran start Act 2 not actually in a relationship yet, because Brandon hasn't come to terms with his sexuality, and he's not going to for many hundreds of pages. So Brandon has dragged Nico into the closet. Nico is this bisexual, pansexual, sexual Olympian, and Brandon, much later in the book, discovers that he's asexual and gay, but he has not come to terms with any of those things yet. So now they're hooking up with each other, but they're hiding, and this obviously causes a lot of friction in the relationship, and it continues the push-pull nature of this story. Nico's mental health also starts to really assert itself as a problem of the plot at this point. He is described as psycho. The word psycho is used an awful lot in this book. He has clear mental health problems. He is has real serious problems with violence. He gets off on it. He gets off on it sexually, but he also gets off on it just in his daily life. He goes to fight clubs, and he has what he describes as just rage, things that take over his mind. And those are calmed somewhat by Brandon. There is this toxic codependency that emerges between the two of them. We will learn more about Brandon's mental health struggles and the nature of their codependency later, but Nico's mental health starts coming up a lot more. It's getting rocky, even though he is hooking up with Bran. This, I think, is accurate. Two younger guys would not be talking about their feelings and their needs in a relationship in a productive way at this point. So this makes sense to me. But Nico is clearly not getting everything he wants out of this relationship. I think he wants it to go a lot further, a lot faster. He wants to be public. That's not happening. So he's going to the fight club more frequently, and Brandon doesn't like that. He would like him to stop. And in fact, he trades sex at one point to get Nico to not go to a fight club, specifically to prevent Nico from fighting with Landon, Brandon's identical twin brother. It's made out to be a big mystery, why Brandon would care about his brother. They're brothers. I don't know why Kent establishes this as this mysterious character thing about Brandon. I think maybe it is because Landon has been in previous books and he's known to be just a real live wire, but it made perfect sense to me why two siblings who are identical twins and grew up with each other and don't have obvious reasons to hate each other would care a lot about one another. So anyway, that's kind of where the relationship is right now. We are trading sex in a manipulative way. Awesome. We get an extended spicy scene where Nico tops Bran for the first time. He had reacted positively to some digital insertion in their first in the dual POV fest that ended Act 1. So Nico's all right, you're ready for Colia. I'm going in. This is perfectly ludicrous. I'll get to it later when I go and catalog all of my many problems with this book, but it is absolutely absurd and implausible that a character as type A and fastidious as Brandon would not have a whole lot of questions or have done research into prepping himself for, backdoor Colia action. This is also the scene where Nico says, "Your hole's getting nice and wet for me," as he applies lube.
I saw a tweet the other day that said, bottoms be like, "Ooh, I'm so wet. Baby, that."
After this, backdoor Colia action scene, Brandon immediately falls into domestic roles at the penthouse with Nico. He puts him to sleep in bed and tucks him in. He cleans up the place. He stocks the kitchen with food. He cooks. And I do not trust this author to handle this particular aspect of homosexuality in a good way, and she doesn't. I don't necessarily have a problem with this. I just don't think that it was handled very well in this book. Later, a chance encounter with Simon, a character who is like a mayfly who comes up in one scene and we basically never hear of again. He is one of Nico's many previous hookups, leads to some miscommunication between Brandon and Nico, and that gets us into an angry / makeup spice scene. As you can tell, lots of spice scenes in this book. They come hot and heavy once the first one happens. This second backdoor spice scene is God. This is the scene where Nico feasts on the after they finish. But as I mentioned, Brandon has not done anything by way of preparation of his backdoor area, so presumably what Nico was feasting on was a healthy amount of Santorum.
Hey, is it okay to say Santorum on YouTube? It's borderline. I think you can get away with it, but just don't use the word frothy.
Should have added that to the content warnings earlier. 2 weeks pass in this way as they continue to have this secret relationship, and it's during this time that we get confirmation that Brandon self-harms through cutting. We also see Brandon's interior struggle of feeling like a girl because he bottoms, and he's in this kind of more feminine role in the relationship. Again, I actually think that this is something that a lot of gay men struggle with. I just don't think it's handled particularly well in this book. I don't trust the perspective of the author on these particular issues. Anyway, despite all these potential struggles, Nico's mental health, like the heavy friction in the relationship, Brandon and Nikolai grow closer. Watching Midsummer Murders and Inspector Poirot, which Nikolai hates, but then he learns to love, and I actually think is kind of cute. It's also during this time that they hook up in a public toilet after meeting with a group of friends, and Brandon freaks out because he thinks they're going to get caught, and I just do not understand this scene. This is like what breaks them up at the midpoint of the book. Nico interprets this freak out and Brandon leaving as like rejecting him, even though there is this clear on-page rationale for why Brandon would be freaking out, is like he doesn't want to get caught in a public toilet. But anyway, this causes them to break up, and I would say that this is the end of the second act, even though it comes at the midway point. This is the traditional Act 2 breakup. There's going to be another breakup that comes midway through the third act, and then we get an entire bonus fourth act, because if you are following my recap right now, you're probably wondering, like, what is the plot? Like, what is the story? The story doesn't really start happening until 85% of the way through the book, so you're going to have to give me a little bit more time. Act 3 begins. 2 weeks pass of Brandon and Nico being broken up. Brandon is self-harming more and reflects that he didn't self-harm when he was with Nico, so we now see the complement of this pretty toxic codependency of these two guys. Being with Nico caused Brandon to not want to harm himself. It is very serious at this point. It is to the point where there is so much blood loss that Brandon is passing out from it. There is extreme unaliving ideation going on. His family is beginning to notice his rapid mental health decline. The way that Brandon is doing this is he just injures himself right here under the strap of a watch that he never takes off. He had occasionally done things on his thighs, but since he was hooking up with Nico and was disrobed around him all the time, he couldn't do that there, so he really was isolated to just doing it here. And then he hadn't been with Nico, and now everything is going terribly. He is spiraling. It is very troubling to read. While this is happening, Landon, Brandon's these names, psycho brother, Landon kidnaps Nico and stashes him in the King Mansion. So this is clearly part of some vengeance plan related to like all the many side characters that I didn't really know very much about. Like, for writing a more than 500-page book that has like literally 30 named characters in it, all of whom have important little roles to play, but frequently are mentioned like once or twice, it is absolutely wild that Kent didn't have a dramatis personae at the beginning of the book. She just has like a a very unusual kind of family tree thing going on. I think mostly so you can know which characters of this series are related to which characters of the previous series. Like, just tell me who these people are, especially if you're not going to tell me who they are. Anyway, Landon kidnaps Nico as part of some vengeance plot related to, I think, Creighton and Jeremy, and I don't really know what was going on with that. It's presumably explained more in the other books. It's not totally clear like why it's happening in this book. It's like a thing that we got to deal with now. So Bran figures this out pretty quickly, and then he helps Nico escape, and this leads to a reconciliation that will not last, and then a spicy scene at Nico's penthouse. This is the scene where Nico says, "You're my favorite f***hole, baby," and it's like, keep it favorite hole of all the holes. Brandon King, your hole is my favorite. God. So this has been happening since the beginning of their hooking up, but after this scene, Brandon goes to shower and he does not let Nico shower with him. Put a pin in that. It is weird, though, that what Brandon is doing is he is showering immediately after unprotected backdoor Colia action. And, you know, having been involved in that a bit myself, sometimes, you know, you actually want to, like, use the toilet a little bit before and then shower. And, like it's not necessarily like a sexy shower time kind of event. So I was like, because, like, this is, I'll save it. So it's during this brief reconciliation that Nico offers the insight that Brandon might be asexual. I don't know how this 19-year-old sex god knows about this, but he does. Brandon kind of resonates with that. He's gonna, you know, he puts a pin in that. He's gonna think about that some more later. There's also some discussion about Nico being in the Russian mafia, you know, his dad being a contract killer for the Bratva, and just like general life stuff. And it is funny and like kind of nice. Like, this is probably the best stuff in the book when they're in this like mini reconciliation period. In fact, it's even during this time that Nico offers to bottom for Bran if he'd like to try it. I think that was a very nice thing to offer. Brandon doesn't want to do that. He has decided that he is just like a total bottom. He's cool with that. And it is framed implicitly by Nico as like introducing exclusivity to their relationship. And by the way, we are now almost 2/3 of the way through the book. We are in what I would consider Act 3, and we are just now getting these scenes. We are not going to start seeing dating until the end of this act. It's a way to write this. It is a way. So 3 weeks pass in this like blissed out relationship period, punctuated by Nico discovering that Brandon has art-related trauma. He sees him doing some like very angry art, and he discovers the self-harm, you know, which Brandon had been hiding. Eventually, he kind of like notices like something under his watch, and you know he's much bigger and stronger than him, and he rips the watch off, and he's like, "Oh my god, you do this!" And then totally ghosts him. It is wild. It is wild, like that he just drops him immediately like that. These discoveries obviously strain their relationship. Nico doesn't talk to Bran after this, and it's because there's miscommunication going on here, but I like, this is, again, I don't think this is genius or anything, but it's like the kind of miscommunication that does happen in relationships. Nico clearly is not sure how to react to learning these things about Bran, so he decides he's going to go to the Fight Club. That's what he's going red, and that's how he knows how to deal with this, because he doesn't take meds that he's been prescribed, because this book is like kind of weirdly anti psychiatric medication. Later, I think that kind of like cleans that up a little bit, but like Nico can avail himself of these things. He doesn't like to do it, so instead he just like beats people out of Fight Club, like, you know, like 19-year-olds do, like Mafia Prince 19-year-olds who are sent to boarding school in the UK do. Specifically at the Fight Club, Nico is gonna fight Landon, and this is a big thing for Bran. We don't know why. I mean, it remains to be, like, it's such a mystery, like, why he wouldn't want his boyfriend to beat the out of his identical twin brother. I wonder why. But, you know, again, Brandon, it remains, for some reason, it's meant to be a mystery. Why he's so protective of Landon.
I realized while editing this that I never got around to explaining the mystery of why two brothers would love each other. After everything that goes down with Grace when Brandon was a teenager occurs, Landon hugs Brandon. And see, like, Landon, it's like, oh, but he's like a dangerous psychopath. So hugging, that's a big deal for Landon King. If you read the other books, you'd understand this, Carter.
So Bran is like, oh God, no, please don't do that. Like he sends desperate texts to Bran, and that's not the thing that breaks them up. So the fight isn't the thing that breaks them up. Desperate texts saying, please don't do this, not the thing that breaks them up. We learn that Brandon knows that Landon is dating Mia, Nico's younger sister, who is an identical twin. So yeah, Brandon is dating Nico and Landon is dating Mia. And again, just like kind of great soap opera. It's just like not played very well. There's so much just like juicy, like catty, like conversation and stuff. Like I just really wanted this to be more of like a violent Gossip Girl set in the UK, and it wasn't. So I don't know. Maybe I just had like wrong expectations here. But just like describing it this way, you'd think like this kind of sounds like what it would be. It is not. Brandon knows about Landon and Mia. That is not the thing that breaks up these two guys. Finally, the thing that breaks them up is Nico over text basically saying like you need to come out, and Brandon is simultaneously not coming out and taking Landon's side over text, and this splits them up. And if you want to call this the Act 2 breakup, you can, but I just feel like the way that the book has been structured, like we're way past that kind of stuff at this point. But like this is another breakup that occurs for about a similar amount of time. The first breakup was 2 weeks. This one is going to last about 3 weeks. 6 days pass. We come back in Bran's perspective, and he's decided like, well, everything is going to I'm just going to come out. He decides to come out to his sister and a character named Cecily, who apparently is his best friend from childhood and has only ever been mentioned once in this entire book. So Landon, Brandon, and Glendon, Glenn and Cecily, a character that we know nothing about, receive Brandon's coming out. It has been established, I haven't talked about it, but it's been established that Brandon is also pretty good friends with Mia. And I don't know why that wasn't just like the person that he came out to along with his sister. It is like bringing in a totally unrelated character, crazy. During his coming out, he says he's gay and he's demisexual. So it's like he has put these pieces together in his head. He's like, I got it. I got the words for this now. For being gay, I'm just going to say this here, it's a little weird that he has had almost no thoughts about being gay up until this point. Kind of strange. All the characters meet up at the Heathen's Mansion for Mia and Maya's birthday party, and Landon shows up, and Nico's there, and they don't like each other. So Nico goes to punch Landon, and it's one of those, like, accidental punch situations. He's going to punch for Landon, and Brandon comes out of nowhere, and he punches Brandon. And he's horrified by this. He's like racked with guilt that he like punched his lotus flower. That's what he calls Brandon throughout this book. His little lotus flower. There's no reason why he calls him that. He just does. And they remain broken up. Brandon sends increasingly desperate texts to Nico, trying to get them back together. Nico ignores all of these. He deletes Brandon's number. That's like how serious this breakup is at this point. But eventually, he acknowledges him and goes over to the Elite's mansion, where he proceeds to give Bran some backdoor Kolya action with no lube against a tree. And this is the scene where Nico says, "You're mine, Brandon. F***ing mine. If you think there's another option out there for you other than me, I have a news flash for you. You f***ing don't. Just know that I'll slaughter anyone you let near you and you in their blood." I mean, at least there would be some lubrication in that scenario. I'm just saying. So, still not back together. Landon is briefly kidnapped. There's a lot of kidnapping in this book. He's briefly kidnapped and assaulted by the heathens who almost break his wrist, which is a big deal because I have not mentioned this. It's a big deal that they almost broke Landon's wrist because on top of being a dangerous psychopath who regularly attends fight clubs, he's also a hotshot sculptor. Oh, God. Okay, so now... character alert. We have a character entering who's pretty important. Grace Bruckner. I mentioned her in 7 years ago when I went through the characters of this book. Grace Bruckner, who had been mentioned early in Act 1 and never again, finally gets a proper introduction at 75% through this book. She is a powerful art agent / baroness who only signs the best of the best, which includes Bran's mom, but not hotshot sculptor Landon. And she has her eyes on Bran, who is a painter. Brandon and his family share an ominous dinner with her. She is wearing red, the color of blood. At this point, at the end of Act 3, and I'm going to say, like, this is the end of Act 3, and this is, like, where the book ends. Brandon comes out to his family. Nico shows up to their house, and, like, the book is essentially over here. There is, genuinely, like, a pretty nice set of scenes, which include... this might be, like, kind of the end of Act 3, the end of the book, or, like, an epilogue kind of thing, but there's like, 20% more left. There is a switch to Levi's POV, which I think is just, like, a nice little cameo for people. We only get that. We only get one chapter from his POV. And Nico is spending time with Brandon's family, and he makes a really good impression on Astrid, Brandon's mom. Not so much on Levi, who is just, like, very protective of his son. Never really warms up to Nico that much. But, like, even though he hates Nico, he loves his son. He sees that he's happy. They have, like, this nice, happy time with each other. Nico and Bran, like, sleep with each other at Brandon's parents' house. Which includes the first and only time when someone showers before sex, and it's Nico who's topping. I can't with this book.
Baby, that's...
And it is at this point that we learn that Nico has gotten a tattoo of a lotus flower over his heart with the words property of B. King. Nico wants to know more about the source of Brandon's trauma. He's not ready to talk about that yet. This is where Nico says, "That was the top 5 of my entire life." I mean, sorry. This is the scene where Nico says, "Even if you hate yourself, I'll love you for both of us." Okay, and this is where dating begins. They are now dating with each other. We are, like, way out past the point of, like, where you think that this book should end. And also, again, like, what is the plot of this book? I don't know. It's hard to say. Only 2% of people on Storygraph say that this book is plot-driven. Yeah. So they're going on dates. And Brandon is using Nico as a model, both painting of him and painting on him, very sensual. And essentially, the entire relationship at this point is resolved. It had been resolved when like, they finally got back together and, like, Nico came out to his parents. Like, they are... The problem of their relationship is over now. And now they're just in, like, relationship bonus time. And you're like, why are we here? And we get this incredibly weird scene in London where they've been having, like, a nice day with each other. They run into a little brown girl who Nico literally gets jealous of because she says she wants to marry Brandon. She's like a child. And Brandon whispers something to her that we later learn is like, "Oh, I'm already taken with this, like, tattooed mafia prince, so sorry, little brown girl." This kind of echoes a thing that had happened earlier. Nico had said, like, some Russian phrase to Brandon, which he said had, just means, like, "Oh, I think you're cute," but actually means "I can't live without you." Put a pin in that. It's also, like, just notable that no other characters are described as dark-skinned in this book except for this little girl and her mom, who is called Noor. And Noor is also the only character who is described as having a problem with Nico and Brandon because of their sexuality. It doesn't lead to an argument or anything, but Nico notices her, and that's like, oh, she's got, like, disgust on her face because of this. That's weird. Don't love that. Brandon still is not talking about, like, his art-related trauma, and somehow Nico realizes that he's even worse now, and it's only when Grace is around. Like, Nico is perceptive, and he's the only one. Like, not even Bran's parents can tell that. It's like, oh, when Grace is around, something's off. And it's because Brandon literally does nothing differently. It's just that Nico can see, like, in his eyes. He can see into his soul. Something is wrong. This is also the moment when Brandon utters the immortal words, "Have you thought about your future in the Mafia?" It's at this point that Grace Bruckner reveals herself to be a comically evil villain who sexually assaulted Brandon as a teenager, filmed it, and sent the video to Bran in some kind of weird mind game power play as a teenager, and then like stayed in his life trying to like get him to do art with her, and like she's been gaslighting him this whole time that like, no, you were actually into it, you're into girls. It was like an awful scene. Terrible. And she is so comically villainous that like she recognizes, well, she doesn't even need to recognize, she knows that these two guys are in a public relationship with each other, and then she confronts Nico and is like, "You're never going to be with Brandon is better than you, this is what I think of you." And then she sends Nico this video evidence of her with a child, and it's like, oh my god. I like can't even. I'll save it for later. Do I need to say, put a pin in it? We then get a flashback scene of this whole thing, so you get like Brandon's fisheye lens view of this, and it's like, oh, this is the art-related trauma. This is he sees black ink over. This is wild. He sees black ink like over, like enveloping his body all the time when he's having like panic attacks, because while he was going through this traumatic event as a teenager, he had a bit of black ink, like a dot of it, on his hand, and while this was happening, he like dissociated and just stared at that black ink. Oh my god. So yeah, that flashback scene happens, and then Bran realizes that Nico knows, because he can hear the video that Grace had sent to Nico playing on Nico's phone. And so Bran attempts to unalive himself by cutting his neck with a shard from a mirror that he broke. And he broke the mirror because he can't stand seeing eyes, because I don't know. Because Grace looked at him with eyes. That's less well established. Brandon survives this attempt, but Grace doesn't, because Nico and Landon, mortal enemies, bond by knocking her off with the help of Nico's father, the elite Russian hitman. They break into Grace's apartment. She is like, knows that this is not going to end well for her, so she's packing up to leave the country. They force her to write a confession in the style of a one of those notes that people leave behind, and then they force her into a bathtub, and they do to her what Bran has been doing to himself, but they let all the blood run out until she's got no more blood anymore. And you know what happens when there's no more blood. You're not alive. Brandon, around this time, as he is recovering from his own attempt, twice thinks that he would like Grace to face justice. But Nico, while he is watching this woman bleed to death, he says to himself, he doesn't believe in justice, he believes in fucking vengeance. So, lol, no justice will be served in this case. Everyone reconciles at the hospital as Brandon recovers. Nico scolds Brandon for attempting to remove himself from this planet. So the very first thing that Nico says to Bran after they reunite is, how could you? How could you try to leave me? Do you know I can't live with you? Don't you know I can't live without you anymore? This is the first thing he says to Brandon, and Brandon is just like, that's mine. That's my man. Okay, very nearly done. There are two epilogues. One is 6 months later. Bran and Nico are living with each other, and they are mutually improving through therapy, in the case of Bran. and new meds for Nico. We basically just get like a little status checkup with them. And then we catch up 2 years later at a big like art award event. Bran is accepting, winning an award. He's now a celebrity artist, not because his art is so great, but because Nico has been filming him while he's been doing art and posting those videos on the internet, and those videos went viral. So he's a celebrity artist because of Nico. So after this event, Brandon and Nico go back to the penthouse, and Bran takes Nico to the studio where the unaliving attempt happened, and it's a pretty traumatic place. And he proposes to him there, and the book ends with Nico being upset that Brandon proposed first, because that's what alpha male tops are supposed to do. The end. All right. Let's start with the things that I liked, because I didn't hate everything in this book. There are some things that I enjoyed, but don't worry, this won't take very long. A lot of these are just sentences that I thought were fun or funny. So at one point, Bran describes Nico as stupidly muscular in a very unnecessary way. I just think that that's like a nice collection of words. Kent has a facility a couple times with this book that I think she deploys really well, of like comic smash cuts. So after Nico realizes that Bran does these 5 a.m. runs, he has shown up and realized this. And then a Bran POV chapter ends. I shove him away hard and break into the fastest run of my running history. I eat the distance back to the mansion in no time. Forget my routine. I need to protect something a lot more important. My sanity. Okay. Then you turn the page. Nico. First line. So I've picked up running lately. I think that that's funny. I think that that's good. I like that Nico gives Bran Jr. some oral attention, and that he offered to bottom. I think that I was surprised that this, alpha male top would deign to allow himself to be penetrated in any of his holes. So I thought that was pretty good. The 2-chapter sex bonanza for their first extended experience, I thought was genuinely really, really good. It felt like a bit much, especially coming like it's kind of a 3-chapter thing, because it starts with the Clara stuff, and then we get 2 chapters, one from each of their POVs. But I really liked it. I think it's good for their like kind of first time they'd had, like the alleyway jerk session. But this is like their first like extended time with each other. I think it's good to have both of their perspectives there. And it's actually pretty interestingly done in that the POV is always on the receptive, non-climax character. And it shifts as that event moves. I don't particularly care for the characters, and I think a lot of like the line level writing in the book is like not so very good, but I thought that construction was pretty good. Toward the end of Act 2, Nico and Bran aren't quite living with each other at the penthouse, but they're spending a lot of time with each other, and it's just kind of nice. I thought that those moments and the moments at what I call, at the beginning of Act 4, as I call it, with Bran's parents, I think that they're nice and they're pretty well done. A line that I highlighted is, we kiss for what seems like hours, tongues stroking and teeth nipping, only this time it's not urgent or leading up to sex. Once we break apart, we don't go to the bedroom, we don't tear each other's clothes off, we just stay in that position with my head on his lap as we watch Agatha Christie. Don't we all want for something like that?
Yes. Oh, yes. 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 Yes.
More just funny lines. He, in this case, Nico, he's gone commando. Of course he has. This is Nikolai, and he's deeply allergic to clothes. I think deeply allergic to clothes. It sounds like pretty, millennial writing. It sounds like something that a lot of people would write. But I just think that, I thought it was pretty funny. Oh, I had a nice, good laugh at Nico, this 19-year-old, describing someone as an older woman. Not that old, maybe in her 30s. I mean, like, how dare you, sir? I really liked that Bran's parents are immediately supportive and acceptive of him when he comes out. I think that's pretty great. And then I've already mentioned that this is a line for the ages. I gotta mention it again. This is my favorite line of the book. Have you thought about your future within the mafia? Is that what they tell you at like mafia grade school when the counselor comes around? I don't know, but I think it was pretty good. Unintentionally pretty funny, I assume, but pretty good nevertheless. And now for everything I did not like about God of Fury by Rina Kent. We will start with Repetitious Repetition. I mentioned this at the very beginning of the recap. There is an awful lot of repeated sentences and concepts and ideas, not just from Bran, but from Nico as well. I think Brandon's chapters suffer for this more because they're just like so... they're such an expression of his trauma, but both of their chapters, because they repeat the same things over and over and over again, it really feels like they're uttering prayers. I don't know that this is true, but it feels true that a lot of people like this book because of the duet audiobook. The two audiobook narrators are very good. I think there's actually like a full cast for it. It's just like very well done. And I can actually imagine that just like going to church and hearing the same prayers and the same songs sung over and over and over again, it can have almost a soporific effect on you. It can like it can be soothing in some ways. I could see that, but just reading it, for me, it became so utterly tedious for the same sentences to be uttered over and over and over again, the same ideas to be chewed over to death. I think that is one of the cardinal sins of this book, that for being over 500 pages, why like, do we really need a 30th or a 40th invocation of like more? I need more from Brandon. I need to feast on him and devour him like top to bottom. Do we really need that? Or like, could we take some of those sentences within this? Could we either like condense it down? Although if you condense it down, then you would realize that there's very little plot and it doesn't really start to happen until the book is nearly over. Or replace some of that inane repetition with like other characters and events and incident. Like, can we actually have some things happening instead of just these characters constantly ruminating? I also started noting words and phrases that are used all the time. The two number one top words and phrases of this book are number one with a bullet, nausea. Nausea is almost exclusively used from Brandon's perspective, and that is like part of his trauma. And then tied for first place is up, which also is pretty exclusive to Brandon's perspective. So this is what I mean when I'm saying like it's like a prayer, especially in his chapters. It's like the same words and phrases just get used over and over and over again. This nausea, this disgusting nausea, the feelings of nausea moving from his bones into his brain to his lungs. Brandon is just like, it is, I think it is his POV is just genuinely unpleasant to be in because of that. And like, that is an accomplishment as an author. It's just at some point the book, it loses the load bearing pillars of the story because there's no plot, and all you have are these prayer like invocations of nausea and my fucked up brain. And I don't think it works particularly well. Here are some other words that are used all the time. Thicken or thickened, exclusively to refer to Kolya or Bran Jr. Rising to attention. Those appendages are also often referred to as painful. You can definitely have, painful thickening, especially if you're wearing tight pants, but it's not always painful. It's like, if it's always, like, they're, men have problems seeing the doctor, but like, Bran doesn't want to go to therapy. Nico doesn't want to get the right psych meds, and neither of them want. Nico doesn't go to. Instead of going to a doctor for his ED, he decides to chase after a straight boy who, like, thank God, turned out to not be straight. But they also apparently have, painful thickenings that maybe they should go see the doctor about as well. The word nefarious is used 5 times. It's just kind of like a strange word to use so much. And this gets into something I will address later in just like the general like bad sentences. But I think that Kent just generally has like very strange word choices a lot. Speaking of Kolya and Bran Jr., those painful thickenings, they are 4 times matched stroke for stroke. 15 times, mostly Nico decides to feast in some way or another on Bran, 1 time on Santorum.
Baby, that's...
And finally, the word psycho is used 26 times. All right, we're gonna go from individual words and short phrases that are repeated all the time to sentences that I don't like and I just think are clunky or bad or didn't work. I'm just going to basically take you through a bunch of my Kindle highlights and commentary I had on these. Let's begin with a very clunky, awkward sentence, which is meant to be like nice. And this is when Brandon first encounters Nico. He stares at his free palm under the slowly setting sun that casts an orange glow on his haphazard jet black hair. From Nico's perspective, not when they offered their mouths, holes, and everything in between. And my comment on this was, are mouths not holes? It was a threesome of epic proportions that started with making out, fucking each other off, and both guys double the girl and fucking her senseless until she nearly passed out. Both guys double her? Do they both have two dicks, Rina? I breathe out, shuffling and searching through the mess in my head, but for the life of me, I can't grasp at the strings of my MIA sanity. This is like where Kent just doesn't seem to have a really strong hold on her character. This is from Brandon's perspective. I don't really think this like Richie Rich British elite would refer to his sanity as MIA. In the alleyway scene, Nico says, "Your dick must be huge. I can feel it through your pants, all erect and begging for attention." There is an absurd amount, by the way, of out loud discussion of thickenings of these thick things, which are almost always painful. It's just like, I don't think people talk like this. He's so pliant and passionate when my mouth speaks to his, so fucking wanton and responsive. His hips roll and he brushes his against mine as I kiss the living daylights out of him. He's a fucking riddle of opposites, my Prince Charming. Hot and cold, a storm in summer, a fucking beast in the form of a gentleman. So, okay, this is like this riddle of opposites. And what are the oppositions that we have here? We've got hot and cold, classic. We've got beast and gentleman, like on point, even like kind of thematically relevant to the story. I think that works really good. A storm in the summer. What is the opposition here that is similar to hot and cold to storm and summer? What's the nature of this opposition like even supposed to be exactly? Is it like Alanis Morissette? Isn't it ironic? Like, oh, it's unfortunate that sometimes there are storms in summer. Is it that the summer is nice and storms are unpleasant? Is it that storms are like cold? I don't understand that. It's been a week since the day he kissed me senseless after I stalked him like a madman before allowing him to do anything. Just like have another go at that sentence. I don't think it's been a week since the day he kissed me senseless after I stalked him, then fucked him like a madman before allowing him to do anything. Also, this is Nico perspective, so then we also get immediately after that, good times. My brow furrows when I don't find him in the kitchen, busy being a Mary Sue. A Mary Sue? A Mary Sue? Is this a British thing about like, is that like the British version of the house husband? I don't think that's what Mary Sue means, Rina. I don't give that one another go. Because I've been haunted by the bitter taste of nausea and self-loathing for so long, I don't know how to live without them. So, I don't know. Like, at this point, I was getting pretty petty with these highlights, but it's either tastes of nausea to pair with them at the end of the sentence, or it's taste that she has written, and it would be without it. It's either a single taste, and that's an it, which is singular, or tastes, which she didn't have, and them, which is plural, singular, plural. Tonight is just a fucked up... Tonight is just a fucked up fucking case of fucking fuckery. And then my note on this was, Nico needy drinky. Too bad I'm too messed up in the head to ever be able to achieve that. So, somehow, Kent has used the word two different versions of the word two. She didn't get the third one in. 4 times in the sentence. Too bad I'm too messed up in the head to ever be able to achieve that. 2 words, 2 words, 2 words, 2 words. It's almost artful in how bad that is. The worst part is that he kept his distance from me, something he hasn't done over the course of the period I've spent at his childhood home. Just like awkward phrasing, man. Like, I don't know, does Kent not have an editor? Like, over the course of the period I've spent? Do you mean like since I've been? If anyone had told me about this scene a couple of years back, I would have called them a borderline liar. What's a borderline liar? Why is it a borderline liar? And now we begin all of the scents and tastes. Nico, although I have other criticisms for this sentence, Nico starts us off with, he, Brandon, tastes like my own downfall and I'm ready to drown in it. Now, this is a very romance book sentence, but it ultimately doesn't make any sense coming from Nico. And this happens several times throughout the book where Kent kind of confuses the motivations of these two characters. I would say that their perspectives are very clear. You always know when you're in a Brandon perspective or a Nico perspective, but their motivations often like overlap with each other in a way where I think that she's just like not keeping track of it. So it doesn't really make sense that Nico would think that Brandon is his downfall. I mean, Nico, like, he sleeps with everybody. He's just chasing after this guy. Like, why would forcing himself on Brandon taste like his downfall? Like, this sentence should come from Brandon. And in fact, a similar sentence does come up in Brandon's POV later. I don't know if I ever highlighted it. But, like, Brandon, as far as we know, like, as far as he knows, and certainly as we know, he's straight. He could see kissing a man as his downfall. That would make sense. Nico's been established as this like boorish, cavalier bimbo who casually hosts orgies. Like, why would kissing anyone be his downfall? I think Kent is just using kind of a cliche sentence here that you see a lot in romance books, but like she's not deploying it in a very artful way, or she's not deploying it strategically in the perspective of the right person. This is like a Bran thought. This is something that Brandon should be thinking, not Nico. But this opens the door to all the scents and tastes. Let's go through all of the weird scents and tastes in this book. His mint scent. It mixes and swirls with the taste of alcohol, cigarettes, and something else that's entirely him. I don't think you can have a romance book without a scent smelling entirely like him in it. That's de rigueur. He tastes like honey, mint, and pending addiction. She does that a lot. She's got like, he tastes or he smells like a sweet thing, herbal thing, and a literary thing. My lungs fill with his scent, mint, blood, and all male. Clover, citrus, and a fucking conundrum. That's how Brandon smells at one point. He tastes of tea, citrus, and lust as fucked up as mine. And also that the clover, citrus, and fucking conundrum is 2 pages before tea, citrus, and lust is of his mind. All right, finally, some just unusual word choices that I noted. Here are some sentences. His voice is deep but authoritarian, and I find myself doing just that. I'm pretty sure you mean authoritative, not authoritarian. Authoritarian is like usually refers to a government or like a person in an official position. Authoritative means like someone who's in charge. Landon pushes them away and slides to my side, a calculative look I don't like slipping into his features. 100% sure you mean calculating, calculative. Here's the thing with all of these. These are just weird word choices. I looked up every one of these. You can use calculative this way, but it is not frequently. You mean calculating. Calculative generally just is like an antique way of saying mathematical. I feel like I'm losing a piece of myself that I'll never recuperate. Pretty sure you mean recover here. Again, it's like, yeah, I guess you could. I'm losing a piece of myself that I'll never recuperate. I mean, like, recuperate is generally not referred. It's not used for like getting back something you lost. It's like healing generally. Pretty sure you mean recover. And then the final weird word choice that I have is movement echoes around me and I remain still. Vehement about trying to ignore him for once. Very sure you mean adamant, not vehement. Again, I guess you can use it in this way, but it's weird. There's a lot of weird word choices, a lot of bad sentences, but there's also a lot of bad writing, generally. Let's get into the bad structural pieces of this book. So I'm calling this section Bad Writing and Other Absurdities, and maybe there's more just like absurdities here than bad structural things. We'll start off with the fact that Landon is a hotshot sculptor. Anyway, Nico is also early on set up to be able to hold his breath underwater. He meditates underwater. He can hold his breath for like 4 minutes, 5 minutes. This doesn't pay off in any way. It's just like a thing about him. I'm not saying that everything about everything has to pay off in some way, but kind of nothing pays off in this book except black ink. And if you're gonna like set up something, like, why not pay it off? It is extraordinarily frustrating that essentially like the villain, the antagonist of this book, Grace, is mentioned one time once in the first act and doesn't come up again until we need to deal with her later. That is like such a wasted opportunity. There's so many things about this book that, like, I think you could take the raw material of this and shape it into something that works, but it extremely doesn't work as it's written. And that gets into like one of like probably like the number one criticism I have of this book, which is, what is the plot? What is the plot of this book? I mean, it's not even really like, it's not rich with incident even. It's really just rich with interiority. It's like the story is these two guys having a lot of sex with each other and like figuring out like how to be with each other. And then in the final 15% of the book, we have like this kind of honestly awful thing that happens with Grace, and then even more awfulness that happens with Bran and his unaliving attempt, and Nico and Landon and Nico's dad and knocking off Grace. Very weird. It is heavily implied that both Nico and Landon have ended people's lives before, and it's just extremely weird to play with that in the way that Kent does. I think it is like very weird. And then that's kind of a thing that does pay off, because it really doesn't seem like this is the first time they've done this. So yeah. Also, Brandon is an MFA student who plays college lacrosse. I don't know what to do with that. This next thing could like maybe go in the gay awakening section in my criticisms with that, but it is like very weird that Brandon goes from having literally no earthly idea what to do with Colia in the alleyway scene to to just like a pro at like orally dealing with Colia just a few scenes later. It's a matter of days, no practice, and this is what's written. I fuck his cock like it's a sport, going deeper and harder, then relax my jaw and let him use my tongue for friction. Wow, that is like, that is a lot. That's a lot, Brandon. I know a thing or two about that, and like, I had to work my way up to that. Nico goes to a fight club multiple times a week, and he has done this for years, and yet he's still beautiful and has no lasting physical damage. And it's like, I know what you're saying. It's like, oh yeah, but I just want the fantasy of these beautiful guys, like, beautiful, strong guys, like, grabbing each other's throats and just, like, going to town on each other. I'm like, yeah, but it also is a book about, like, childhood trauma, and it's very real, and, like, you didn't have to have the fight club, right? You didn't... These are choices. Everything about writing is about making choices, and it just feels like almost every time Kent had a choice to make, she made just like a baffling one. I mentioned the multiple breakups in the story recap, but it is extremely weird that they have two serious breakups in this book. They have a midpoint breakup and then this Act 3 breakup. It seems like this is another consequence of just like not having any idea of a plot for this book, but like you could have one big breakup that's more related to it. It feels like the story is crying out for conflict between Nico and Landon to be the driver, because that is like one of the main drivers of the second breakup, and then having Grace be a part of that, like having her been a more active participant in manipulating this would have just gone a lot. It would have gone a long way of like reminding us that Grace is around. We could have like trusted Grace at the beginning, or like had reasons to trust her and think like, oh, like she's great, she's helping out Bran. And it's like, oh, Landon's a psycho and like she's like trying to protect Bran, and then slowly come to realize like, oh no, she's manipulating everything. Like she's the reason why all of the bad things are happening. Now maybe I feel better about like the wild way that she goes out. Probably not, but like I'm just like shooting from the hip on that one. And it's like, that seems like that's a better way to handle that. And it's just like, nope, I'm going to break them up twice. There is just like chronic levels of telling and not showing. I've scrolled through some of the Goodreads reviews on this, and there are not a lot of negative ones, but the ones that are negative, almost all of them mention Kolya. I think I'm going to mention that in like 2 seconds because there's not a lot to say about it. It is weird.
I forgot to record that section. There are a lot of sentences about a 5-year-old and their anatomy. That's it.
But I think that several people note this, and I think that it is just like, this book is just constantly telling you things and not showing them. I have a couple things written down here, like, I'm not secure in my body, my sexuality, or my own fucking head, but he touches me as if he's blind to all these flaws. He touches me as if I'm normal, and I need that. I fucking crave that. That is Brandon telling us something that we have seen, and you could just show some more. Like, it's just like not trusting your audience about like what's going on. That it's like the characters have to tell you like, this is what he's doing for me. This is how he's healing me, as opposed to it just happening. It's weird that Nico knows a lot about sexuality. He knows about asexuality and kind of coaches Bran on that for being just like a patently absurd character. This is kind of like a weird thing that he's the one. Like, again, it just seems like like so much happens either in the interaction between Nico and Bran or in their heads, and then it's like, oh, and Grace is around 350 pages later, or like Cecily, here's Cecily, you can come after her now. It's like, instead of all of this repetitious interiority, like maybe there could have just been scenes with other characters. This is a small one, but I think that this is just like a great example of how Kent's writing is like meant to sound good and it's not actually good. So Landon, toward the end of the book, when they are trying to figure out like what they're going to do with Brace, Landon says, what's the use of being labeled a genius if I couldn't save the one person who matters? One, this is another tick of Kent's. She uses that labeled in that way many times throughout this book. But also, she misses an opportunity for showing like Landon's true character. He shouldn't have said, what's the use of being labeled a genius? He should have said, what's the use of being a genius if I can't save the one person who matters? I've mentioned this like 10 times at this point, but there are just like far too many minor characters who show up out of nowhere. Annika, didn't even mention her because she's not particularly really relevant, but literally shows up out of nowhere. Maya, who is Mia's identical twin, shows up out of nowhere. Cecily, who is on the receiving end of Brandon's coming out, I think is mentioned one time, and then she has the coming out scene. And then it is wild that Grace's name comes up like twice in the first 350 pages, and it's all in like the first like one chapter in one conversation. And then we just like have all of this stuff happens, and then she resurfaces so much later. Finally, I don't know why it's called God of Fury. So there is a moment at the end where Landon and Nico refer to themselves as gods. I'm sure like this is all related to like whatever the bigger thing that Kent is doing. But like the thing that is really at the beating heart of this is like possession and jealousy. Like Nico is quite jealous of Brandon in so many situations, like so much so that he is jealous of a child who is like, I think you're cute and maybe I'll marry you one day. Like, why it's not called God of Jealousy and is instead called God of Fury is kind of beyond me. This next section is called Twisted. I found myself just like highlighting all of the kind of dark romancy aspects of this book and just coming up with increasingly absurd ways of putting the word twisted in there. Here are a bunch of just kind of things that I didn't particularly like about this. People who enjoy dark romance, maybe you do like some of these things. I don't think that they're done particularly well, though. So one thing that just bugged the crap out of me is almost every time Brandon and Nico are in each other's presence, they are grabbing each other's throats and shoving each other against the wall. I mean, it's just like, even in non-sexual situations, it's just like an unusual level of casual physical violence around each other. I gotta say, I don't love the nature of the dub con, or really, like, I think getting into even non-con of this book, Brandon says, you haven't exactly been subtle, and the answer is no. And Nico says, I can work with no. I don't love that. In the alleyway scene, which I mentioned, Brandon was drunk. He says no. He says, don't make me do this. Like, this is awful. Like, he says, don't make me do this. I whisper when he doesn't make a move to remove his hand. Too late. Nico says, too late. And then Brandon says, I'm drunk. And like, we are meant to see this as like he is offering excuses, and Nico is able to like see into his soul and know that he really wants this. We don't have evidence of that from Brandon's perspective. We have very little evidence of that from Brandon's perspective. So I think that this doesn't come off the way that the author intends. And it's because the author knows where things are going to go. The author knows that Brandon is asexual, demi, into guys. But we don't know that at this point yet. So I think that was like extremely... just like irresponsible. Oh my god. A bunch of things from Nico. Sooner or later, I'll wear him down. I always do. Eventually, things kind of shifted away from like the dub or non-con dark stuff to just like violent things. So here's some examples of that. There are these times when I'm in the mood to destroy everything, myself included, a high without the drugs. This is from Nico's perspective. Insanity without the straitjacket. And it is some form of a mental illness. He has some perspective here. At least according to the hotshot psychiatrist my parents took me to the first time. I beat a kid to near death for calling Mia a mute at the age of 10. Nico says, sex and violence go hand in hand with me. A high, a release, a perfect synergy of up energy. Love that. Love that. I actually think I'm not going to say some of the specific sentences that I highlighted about Brandon's self-harm, but there is just like an awful lot of cogitating and interiority about that. And it's just like very troubling. I don't think I don't have a problem with that being in any kind of book. I just think that it needs to be handled with a greater level of care than was on display with this one. But after these flashes of violence, we get back to the possession. You better not let anyone else touch you, or I swear to my murder threats will become reality. Rina, this is like where we really need to know, like, has he done it before? Has he... You can just like write it down on a slip of paper. You know, it's just like, there you go. So I want to return to one of the frequent highlights. I mentioned this before glibly. Even if you hate yourself, I'll love you for the both of us. It's a frequent highlight on Kindle. It is like it seems like a nice sentiment. People like this line. It's a good line. I think it's messed up. And not in the like, oh, I'm Bran, I'm so messed up in the head in the black ink kind of way, right? I think it's the kind of sentiment that it can be quite toxic in relationships. And it's just like the author is not realizing that. It's rarely good to live your life entirely for and through another person. And therapy is better than love in these circumstances. Bran needs therapy. He doesn't need Nico just like, my heart will be so big that I will make sure that you get through this because like I can control the world. I'm the god of fury, right? He needs therapy. The final thing is actually, thinking about it, it's maybe like a small moment of actual genius. So within this like dark twisted section, there is something that I think is kind of good. So when Bran is having this flashback to when he was assaulted as a teenager, he has this. So he was already he's like 16 or something, and Grace was I think meant to be like in her 30s, and like not like a big woman. And this is from Bran's POV. He says, I could have fought her or pushed her off. I was hitting puberty pretty hard and was definitely physically stronger than her. But I was too confused, too caught up in the attention she showed me, too scared and horrified about the thought of hating the idea of having sex with everyone. So I think that this is actually like pretty good. Like this kind of assault absolutely happens. And people often jump to this, oh, you were stronger. Like, why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you push them off? That is like not how it works. And I actually really appreciated this perspective that Kent brought to this. So props to Kent. We're getting close to the end of all of the horrors. We have to now tread through the land of homosexuality, a land with which I am deeply familiar. So I've already mentioned a few of these things. Like, it's pretty wild that Bran went from like, thickened members, and then he's like, yeah, and then I was going at him with my mouth like, but it is wild to have such a 180 on men with no introspection in a book that is essentially all introspection. I think that is like it's just like, what is even the point of this? So getting into the weeds on this a little bit, I've got to bring up bottom prep. I have to do it. And it like, there is no prep for bottoming in this book. And if you follow me on other platforms, I've talked about this extensively. And maybe I'll put a link to a video that I've done that is kind of for authors about how to decide like what level of prep to have in your book. But the core message that I've delivered on this multiple times is it has to be driven by the character. And this is why I'm particularly aggravated by this, because Brandon's character is endlessly described as type A, obsessive, a clean freak, fastidious. And it's like, it is wildly implausible. It is crazy, Rina, that you have created this character and he is going to get Collia'd up the rear end, and he's not like, I wonder what's gonna happen with the other stuff that's there. It is wild that this guy does not ask about having Colli'a up there without any protection around it, or him, or whatever. Like, Colli'a, I would assume, is a man. It is just like, you cannot like walk down this road with this kind of character and not deal with prep. Like, you could deal with it with one sentence. You could have like one sentence in an early Bran POV being like, I did a lot of research on this and I know what I'm doing, and then I would never think about it again. But like, you didn't even do that, so it's just like, doesn't work. I gotta mention that like all of the climaxes, except for I think one for sure, maybe two out of the about a dozen spicy scenes, are all hands-free climaxes for Bran. Tisk tisk tisk. Like, that's extremely rare. I know people like to read that, but like this is maybe a personal preference thing. I like to see communication between partners and like figuring out the right way to get off. And it's also just like wildly implausible that your first time that it would happen that way. I've already mentioned this before, but your hole is getting nice and wet for me, baby. Baby, that's shit. Here's a line. His eyes are clearer now, more in tune with the Nikolai I know as he kisses my jaw, my nose, and my lids. What is he doing? I tug on his hair. Stop kissing me everywhere like I'm a girl. I think that this clangs, and I've mentioned this a few times, not just about coming to terms with being gay, but like other things. I just like really don't trust this author to deal with complex subjects, and this is one of them. There is absolutely struggles that many gay men have about femininity and like bottom shame. That is real. That is absolutely a thing. I just don't trust this author to deal with it in a productive way. Moving from that kind of heavy criticism to like in a completely other direction, Colli'a. Everyone's keeping up with Colli'a is Nico's thick thing, right? Colli'a is pierced, has a Prince Albert piercing in it, which everyone really, really loves, I guess. I think it's in the first scene where Bran gets that, rear entry Colli'a action. It's the thing he's attending to. He's getting off on feeling the piercing deep in him. So first of all, I have never had a piercing in someone deep inside me like that. But like, having been involved in a lot of these situations, I am like more than 99% sure that you couldn't feel that at all, like beyond the first like inch or two of that area, first of all. And secondly, this is where I'm like, have you ever done this before, Rina? Have you ever done this? Like women do this. It is crazy to me that Brandon's first time having that in him, the thing that he is paying attention to is a piercing that he can somehow feel like 8 inches inside of him, and not his hole being stretched out. Like, what? It is Like, it is laughable that that it is the piercings on Nico's massive hog that he feels in his butt and not the thing, the object itself. It's just unforgivable as well. Like, I have to keep going back to this prep thing. It is unforgivable that Nico is like this sort of like sex god, and he hasn't like he doesn't work with Bran at all on figuring this stuff out. Like, he's in love with him. They should be having more conversation and dealing with this kind of stuff. It's just like, oh, that's gross, and that's gonna pierce my beautiful romantic fantasy. I just think that's bad. I think that there was opportunity for like real genuine communication here, and it didn't happen. But no, instead we get the like 20th repetition of someone's thing thickening and matching someone stroke for stroke with their painful Colia. Ugh, God, I'm getting mad. Bran asks Nico, do you do that a lot? Do what? Take care of your buddies? It hits me then. I don't. Not necessarily, I mean. Most of them are experienced, and I don't like the hassle of the baby bisexuals unless they've prepped themselves beforehand. So, like, Rina even brings this concept up and doesn't deal with it within the context of this relationship. There's more, by the way. Like, this just gets worse. So I already mentioned the feasting on the Santorum, wild. I'm not going to belabor like Brandon immediately taking on domestic roles and like not dealing very successfully with this like femininity thing. Okay, so late in the book, after one of their many reconciliations, Bran says, he even taught me how to perform an enema. My ears perk up. What? So, ... that's a thing for gay sex, apparently. The first time he did it for me, and that was ... interesting. He teased me the whole time while I was face down on the bed, arse in the air, and I might have come. This one thought from Brandon, just like the whole thing comes crumbling down. I'm like, Rina, do you know like why gay men douche? Some do. Some use those objects for it like it's a kink thing. Generally, it's for cleaning things up. And the fact that Bran is like, oh, this is like apparently like a gay spicy thing, means like he doesn't know anything about this. He's done no research. So she has closed the door on the possibility of like, oh, I'm sure Bran just like figured this out on his own. He's like, oh, what's this? I guess it's a thing for male on male action. Awful, terrible, just like jail, bottom jail. Here's an instance of like something good and then something bad. The shot and the chaser. A good thought, a good set of sentences. It often burns when he first buries himself in me, but he always, without exception, gives me time to adjust. That's great. Immediately afterwards, Nico says, "You're my favorite hole, baby." I've already mentioned like getting rammed up the back with no lube in the out of doors up against a tree. I hope it was like a spruce, or like I hope that Bran didn't like have his face up against like real hard scratchy bark. The very end of the book, Bran proposes, and Nico is like, seems to be upset about that. I hate you for beating me to this. I'm supposed to be the one who proposes. I think that this is Rina being like, see, I'm subverting it. I'm flipping it on its head. And then immediately it's like, yeah, but it's like you flipped a cat on its head and dropped it, and then it immediately got back on its paws, because it's like you flipped it on its head and then had one of your two main characters be like, hey, I'm supposed to do bah! And then that is echoed just just a few pages earlier with like the worst thing in the book when it comes to like this kind of representation. And it's like, genuinely, I don't want to have the conversation about like good, bad representation, whatever. I think like all kinds of authors can write good and bad representation. I just think that this is the worst thing that happens is Landon talking to Brandon. I mean, but like their names, first of all, terrible. But like Landon coming to terms with Nico essentially probably going to becoming his brother-in-law, and before Landon leaves and lets Nico come back in and scold Bran for, almost unaliving himself. Landon says, "Please tell me you top the motherfucker." Jail forever. The final section of this video is entitled "The Hatred of Women." You get the impression, reading this book, that whoever wrote the book doesn't have a particularly high opinion of women. So, here are some examples. Nico: "I didn't go for a run with Bran today, because if I saw pretty Clara again, I would be tempted to ruin her features. And I never, and I mean never, get thoughts of violence about girls in general." So that's an example of like, I want to ruin her features, but it's like, it's Clara. It's Clara specifically. It's fine to hate her because she's so hateable, right? Like, she's the bad person. Later in that same scene, Nico wishes to see lots of blood gushing from all her fucking holes. Later, still on Clara, Nico thinks, "My only option is to dismantle that control, Bran's control over himself, and shred it to pieces right in front of his mysterious eyes. He obviously doesn't like me anyway, so what's the harm in making him hate me a bit more? Anyway, Operation Eliminate Bimbo will soon take effect. What I know about Clara is that she's an attention since she likes to post all her pictures with lotus flower, a gold digger since she's all about the designer bags, shoes, and things he buys her. In bed, for obvious reasons. I clearly brought him more pleasure than she ever has. He kissed me with his eyes closed." I don't even really like saying all that. Nico, again, lots from Nico, but not exclusively. "He's not your fucking babe. I want to drill that into her head and watch as her skull splinters to pieces. But see, one, it's Clara, but Clara's bad. She's bad. It's okay to be mad at Clara. And two, Nico, he's violent. And he's like violent toward everyone, even though earlier he said, like, well, I never feel that way towards women." Showing that it's not all Nico, here's Landon. She starts to say something else. Again, pretty sure we're on Clara still here. But Land stands in front of me and pushes her away as if she's a prop. "Off you go! Don't show your face around my brother again or I'll cut it to pieces." Lovely. And then here's Brandon, closing out the Clara section. "All this time, I didn't hate her. I didn't feel anything for her to hate her. Now, I want to wrap my fingers around her neck and watch as the life leaves her sleazy eyes." Finally, there is the entire end sequence with Grace. And again, it's like the author is predicting, criticism about misogyny and hating women. And it's like, Grace is evil. She's an evil woman. She did this horrible thing. So it's totally fine to, throw her around her apartment and then, drag her into the bathtub and, slice her open and let all of the red stuff pour out, right? Am I right, guys? Right? That's normal. I'm normal. And so that's the end of this video. I've been recording for hours. I'm exhausted. The process of recording this video has been therapeutic in some ways for me. I feel like I have purged the material of this book from me. Although perhaps it is in some ways like The Ring, a grudge curse that might jump through the telephone or the tablet or the computer screen and get into you now. Working through all this material is almost like working through the material of the book. It's overlong, it doesn't make a lot of sense, it is endlessly repetitious, and it has genuinely made me feel a little ill, dizzy. I think I have a little bit of a headache. It's getting pretty hot in the room where I am right now, and not in a good way, not in a spicy time kind of way. My final thought is, I'm just very dispirited that this is such a popular and recommended dark romance book. I think the darkness really doesn't go with the genre all that much. Kent herself mentions in the author's note that this isn't very, the relationship isn't very dark. The darkness is really kind of about the themes. It just doesn't really feel like it's doing a lot with the dark college romance label that it has. And yet this is so extremely popular. And I think as I was working through this material, yes, the audiobook narrators really seem to be driving a lot of attention here, but I also think it's it's that like semi-religious aspect. It really makes me I am worried for like the state of writing and literature in some ways, because it's almost like it's good that it's bad. Not bad like, oh, it's sleazy, it's trashy, but like the writing is terrible. But it's terrible in a way, like it's frequent repetition that it can kind of like get into you. It can like infect you a little bit, and then you just kind of, once like these kind of these templates have been established for these two characters, they just get played over and over and over again in their chapters, and you can like predict where everything is going. You can even predict like the Grace stuff like from fairly early on, I think. And I think it's just like kind of comforting in some ways to read a story like that. It's very long, especially if you're like listening to it. It's like something to do for a long time. But I don't think it's not challenging in any like meaningful kind of way. I don't think it's doing anything particularly well. And this is the first like actual marketed as dark romance book I've ever read. And the one thing that I'm like really holding on to is I am not going to let this spoil that entire genre for me. I would love, especially if you've made it to the end of this video, good for you. Holy shit.
It's pretty good for shit.
I would love recommendations of dark romance that people think is actually written really well. Even if it goes a lot further in the themes and the activities than this book has. Like if I were ever to review something like that, I would, if I don't like those things, I would mention that as part of like the subjectivity of my review. But if I thought that they were done well, I would say so. I'm really like hungry to find something that lives up to a title like God of Fury. I think that it's just, this book like is such a good example of over-promising and under-delivering. God of Fury. He's a 19-year-old college student who sleeps with a lot of people and has mental health issues. Wow. And I'm pretty sure the God of Fury is meant to be Nico and not our nauseous god, Bran. Our God is a nauseous God, he paints, but never eyes because he was traumatized. Our God is a nauseous God.